Hello, everyone. It's Meeple Syrup, and it's time for the show. It's episode, I think, 120, and we're calling this one "Stay on Target." Um, we might have used a Star Wars pun before, but this one we're using again if we have already. And we're here tonight with two wonderful people. We're here with Megan and with Jayme Boucher, and we're going to talk about marketing today. We're also going to talk about game design, of course, because that's what we do on the show, and we'll talk about Daryl because he's not here. No, hopefully Daryl will be joining us very shortly in the chat. Erica can't be here tonight. She sends her apologies. She's eating food with people that are not me and Daryl. So
Wah.
she's somewhere else, right? But anyways, let's get some introductions before we start. Let's start with Jayme. Jayme, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jayme. I am relatively new to the game industry. I was working for a toy company that started selling games in the US, and it wasn't really part of my primary job function there, but through that, I got to attend a few of the cons, and I was like, ooh, what's this industry?
Mm-hmm.
And it really interested me a lot. And so after a couple years of doing the con circuit specifically, I sought out a job in the industry itself. And now I work for GTS Distribution, which is a great way to get to know the industry because I have access to work with all the fantastic publishers and retailers. And it's so much product knowledge to be able to sponge, and I get to network and meet with a lot of great people. And it's great.
Yeah. And were you gaming, like board gaming, before you took a job in the industry?
Not really. Like it was, once in a while, some friends would want to have like game night, but that was usually like some really light party game stuff that you can find like in any store.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing too deep or fancy. We'd done Catan and stuff like that, but this really opened up a whole new world, which has been really
Wow,
interesting.
that's really actually
Yeah.
quite interesting because you took a pretty deep dive. Not only did you change your job, but you deepened the hobby as well for yourself. That's pretty cool. Like I'm looking at your
It's
shelves and going, that's a pretty deep shelf of stuff you got going on there.
I feel like that's
Excellent.
a tendency of people who are coming into the industry for the first time to like be completely blindsided and overwhelmed and super excited about all the options out there.
Hmm.
And I kind of have like an obsessive personality about new things that I'm interested in anyway. So when you pair those together, this is what happens.
That's awesome. And talking to the lady with the really cool backdrop, where are you?
I am at my home, but I film in my bedroom. So unless you want
Right.
to see my bed and my unmadeness, then you get these awesome canvas backgrounds.
That's cool. So, oh, that's just a
Um,
piece of canvas.
yeah, this is just canvas.
Oh,
It's
that's
like
so
the phone
awesome.
booth on Pee Wee.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Oh,
I
there's
used to
there's
just use
Daryl.
this amazing. I'm sorry.
Hi.
I said, oh, there's Daryl. We can't talk about him anymore.
Oh man, I was just about to get into my good Daryl stories.
Oh no. I love your
Hi,
background.
Daryl.
Yeah. Sorry. So
Oh,
keep on
that
going where you
great
were.
background.
We'll talk to Daryl later.
That's okay.
Now it's
So
me.
I'm Maggie or Marguerite. I work for a company called PSI, which stands for Publisher Services Inc. We stand in between publishers and distribution, basically to help funnel games into distribution and into mass market, and help them do like warehousing and sales and B2B marketing and that kind of stuff. Take a lot off their plates so they can focus on actual just making the game and doing consumer marketing. I was previously a retail buyer for a pretty big game store here in Seattle, and that's where my like obsessive product knowledge comes in. Just like Jayme, like there is no mild hobby in my world. There is 0 or 100, and I pick 100 every time. So I have like a crazy encyclopedic knowledge of games at this point.
Yeah,
It's getting ridiculous.
which is useful for people like us. We like that. And
It's
hey,
true.
Daryl, what's happening, Daryl?
Hey, sorry I'm late. I volunteer on Wednesday nights, and on my drive back, I had a wonderful phone call from a publisher asking to sign one of my games. So,
Well, that's good.
Hot dang.
so I had to pull
Ooh.
off. And that was good news. So
Yeah, right.
Hey.
I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm not sorry as well. Sorry, not
Yeah.
sorry.
So is
What's
that
going on?
number 300, 400?
Yeah. Do you count?
No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, he does.
Also, what's going on with your hair in the back of your head?
Yeah, I got I got the hockey hair.
You totally do.
It's getting too long. I need a haircut. And then the problem is my barber has become super popular,
Well,
which
because
I'm
you've
kind of
been
happy
putting ads
about.
out for them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I met him at a taco fest and he was giving free haircuts for charity, which is awesome. But
Mhm.
now everyone knows he's awesome. So I had to book. I was trying to get a haircut before BGG, and I'm still waiting 2 more weeks.
Apparently, it's pretty
Oh,
obvious.
wow.
Yeah,
He
but
book, he
that's
books
great
like
for him.
over a month in advance now.
And he does a good job because when Daryl's coiffed, he's a fine looking gent. Right now, he looks
I
like
try.
a kind of like a hockey thug.
I'm very unkept. I feel like
Yeah,
very
you kind of
bushy.
are, buddy. Yeah, bushy. That is a word that you will never use to describe me. Bushy.
I mean, for a group of people who most of us work from home for most of our jobs, like we look pretty good. We're doing an okay job.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
I
doing
showered
okay,
like
yeah.
a half
Yeah.
hour ago, people.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, it's good. It's all right. So, Daryl, what's up with you? Other than getting
What is up with me? I'm happy to be back from BGG. That was super fun. It was just a wonderful convention as always, and seeing friends, playing games. Actually got to play lots of games, so that was super fun. Usually conventions are a lot of work, and it was a nice mix of still getting some work done, but still it felt like a nice little family event as well. So
Was Tanya with you?
yeah. Tanya was not, and then I actually a fun adventure I got to do was after BGG. I flew to Mike Gray's house.
Yay,
So
Mike.
anyone who's not familiar with Mike Gray,
Mall
Mike
Madness.
Gray
Only Mall Madness.
is the inventor of Dream Phone and
Yeah.
Mall Madness
Yeah.
and Shogun and
And
Fortress
Fortress
America and like many other amazing games. So it was super fun to hang out with him. He's like a very generous and kind and wise person who loves board games and any excuse to get to
Yeah.
play them and talk games and share
He's the kind of guy
stories.
that you'd want to be your grandfather.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, he's like my board game grandpa. Yes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I was gonna tell you, Tanya told me that when people leave Hasbro, they become has-beens.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what we can call him and
He's
Rob.
he's
bunch of other
a
people, you know?
legend has been, I guess then.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
amazing.
Yeah. So that's great for your game. Awesome. You got it signed. That's wicked. And let's start chatting marketing. So on this show, Daryl and I ask questions and our guests give the answers. So that's what's going to happen today. Daryl, do you want to start with questions and
Yeah.
pick a person, ask a question, and then we'll just
Yeah.
bounce back and forth like we do all the time.
We'll ping pong back and forth, asking questions. But here's a question that I have, and it's a maybe an easier one to start. But what is? And I'll point this to Jayme first. But can you describe a little bit of like how do you keep in the loop with publishers and know what games are coming up, and like how do you manage all that? And how would especially someone who's maybe, because we have a lot of designers, but some designers that publish as well, how would they ever get on your radar or talk to you? Or could you weave that in together, like kind of the relationship you have with publishers and all
Yeah,
that
sure.
juggling?
So it's kind of a twofold answer. So the first part of the question, how do I keep track? What I'm seeing is typically games that are coming out from the vendors that we already have an established partnership with. So it's a little bit easier. You know, there's a group email address. They send all of their solicitations, any new updates about new products that they're announcing, when their pre-orders are due, etc. That's pretty easy because it's all the communication coming into one place, and it's just the biggest challenge there is sorting through the volume and keeping track of everything. But for people who are looking at it from an outsider's perspective, who are curious how to get in on that radar, at GTS at least, we have people called category managers. And what they do is they sort of act as the funnel, the gateway that sorts through all the product out there and helps people, advocate for themselves and their games and get them out there into the wild. So the first step for somebody that's looking to make that relationship happen with a category manager is to reach out and offer a really good sales sheet Sell sheets, that is important on both sides of that coin. So whether you're someone new trying to get into distribution for the first time or you're an established company, a sell sheet is really, really important. And you would be surprised at the number of them that we get that don't have all of the information that they need. So I would say that that is kind of your golden ticket to getting someone to take you seriously and pay attention to your product. Providing something that is really easy to read, comprehensive. It has the title of the game, the designer, the release date, the date you want your orders in by, long and short descriptions of the game. You want to be able to have a pitch that retailers can put out there, but also something for consumers to be able to read directly from you. Give a nod to the theme, the mechanics. Something that I've been telling publishers to do a lot lately is a lot of them rate their own internal titles on like an A, B, C title. I think that you shouldn't be afraid to compare your product to other games on the market. I think that that's really helpful because a company saying that they have an A title, that might not be an A title in every retail store across the country. It depends very much on the demographic and who's buying the games there. So if you can instead say, well, this game is very much like this other existing product that's already on the market for these reasons, then people can make the connections on their own. So providing information like that is very important. Listing details like the country of origin, the MSRP, all of that information. Put it together in a very nice, neat, easy to read PDF, and that is how you can start those conversations and get into distribution.
Wow,
Did that answer everything?
Yeah, that was amazing and a tall order. And as you know, I'm pretty short, so that's going to be hard for me to do. But that was great. And it's funny because you mentioned the thing that we often talk about not doing, which is compare your products to other games on the market. And that's something that as designers we tend to not recommend people do when they're pitching their games to publishers.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see it from the other end as, yeah, that makes sense from a sales point of view because you want the store that's eventually going to buy this game or stock the game to sell again, the resellers, to be able to teach it quickly.
Exactly.
And when they can grasp that, it's like Scrabble, but with dexterity or something like that,
Sure. And so just from a sort of selfish point of view is if I'm looking at 400 new games this month, it will help me remember what things are if they're being compared to other titles. And it doesn't have to be, it's exactly like this. It can be, it has pieces of this mixed with this, or it's the opposite of this game. Anything that will sort of anchor to existing knowledge that's already in there is awesome.
So really, it's just self-serving, Jayme, right?
Yep, it's all about me. So if you guys can all just cater to my needs and make my life easier, that'd be great.
I'd be happy to do that if I was a publisher, but I'm not. So, hey Maggie, what was that? What was that phrase you used before? B2B. What does B2B mean?
So, and that's actually something I would mention here. Sheets is that I work in business to business marketing.
Oh, okay.
And so if you're touching end users, the actual people that are going to go into the retail store and purchase the game, it's a very different conversation than speaking with the buyer of a distributor or a buyer at a retail store. So I would absolutely 100% agree that when talking with a buyer, I mention other games like, oh, this is gonna be like, X or Y or Z game, because then they'll know kind of what echelon in the number to order and how to order it and how often they'll need to. But when speaking with an end user or like an actual gamer, especially reviewers, I would often say, please don't another game, because it gives you kind of a bias before you even open the game and begin to play it. You're going to be comparing it, and so you're going to get some false equivalencies, in my opinion. I'm trying, like, I really believe that what Jayme said is correct, and I don't want to sound like I'm going against that, but I think in another way, there's like the game that came to mind, Import Export was on Kickstarter, and it's this first-time designer from Utah, and on the Kickstarter, like on the first line of the Kickstarter, it says, Glory to Rome meets container. And that puts some big shoes for this little game to fill for a first-time designer. and there's absolutely no way to play that game without then thinking about that comparison. So I think you have to be really careful of what your goal is with your marketing. Like if your goal is to get people to buy it and get into a buying habit, that's a very different thing than to get to your end user, your person that's going to go home and play the game with their family. So that's my B2B spiel, I guess.
Yeah,
super interesting. And we love the variety. Don't feel like sharing other sides of the coin is putting down someone else's comments, because the nice thing is we're trying to get a variety of ideas and feedback out there, and then I'm sure someone does it totally different than both of you. So there's lots of examples of marketing and such. And I want to continue this marketing conversation because this is especially something that Sen and I are not experts in any way about, but you two are. So the nice thing is kind of picking your brains and helping designers think ahead of the other steps. So maybe actually, I'm going to throw this back to Maggie. Maybe kind of just give the Cole's Notes version for, say, someone like myself that's pretty ignorant on like what happens to my game after a publisher gets it. But what are all the like steps? Can you describe internally of like when the publisher gets it with a distributor, what are all the other things going on? Like we heard a little bit about sell sheets, but there's a whole bunch of mystery to me that it just gets to my game store. So could you kind of walk that through for especially designers like me that just think games show up magically on the shelf?
Well, it is magic, just so you know, and a lot of people in your lovely chat right now are part of that magic. So a publisher signs your game or comes up with a game internally or develops it internally or whatever. So they're going to push the button, usually in China, sometimes in Poland or Germany or USA or whatever. The game gets manufactured, and then you have all these games. And so you need to transport them. You need to figure out where they're going to be warehoused, what port they're coming into, what truck they're going to go on. And there's just this whole supply chain. So generally the next step is either going to be your, as a publisher, internal warehouse, or someone like me at PSI, we do warehousing for other people. And then from that warehouse, the distributors will generally take a chunk. They will order their pieces, and that will get shipped off to them. And then those big boxes that we all know, the like Amazon, Target, whatever of the world, will also take their chunks, and that will go to their warehouse. So I know it's sounding like a lot of steps, but it's because as a game store at the very end of that, you're only ordering a couple pieces of this, and we want to produce these games in the thousands. So you have to figure out a good way to manage all those 1,000 copies. So the distributor gets their copies, and all the while, before those physical pieces are moving around, all the information is going through, and you're taking orders and pre-orders and trying to figure out like exactly where those pieces are going to go before they even hit the actual physical space. So like before game X gets to our warehouse, we know that probably, 500 of them are going there and 500 are going there, so that we can kind of, as soon as they hit the dirt, start getting them out the door, because the time between getting off a boat and getting to a retail store is shortening every year. It's getting really, really tight. So that's the most of it. There's a couple more steps in another couple of supply chains, but that's what mostly Jayme and I deal with.
Okay, excellent. So we have a wonderful chat going on right now. We have a lot of people whose names you may remember from being on our show in the past. So, Mike Paschal and Amber Cook and Paul Saxberg and David Tomei and let's see, Bobby Stickle and all sorts of people up in the chat doing stuff. Ryan Skinner, and they're telling us about the sell sheets that they particularly think are good that are available online. So we're going to tell that to the audience right now. Looney Labs, under their, let's look at one here, under their media center, they will often put their sell sheets. So I'm going to share one with you guys right now. See, there's a chat going on. And over here, you can see, there's Kristen. That's awesome. There's Adventure Time Flux. You can see here it has your demographics. And under that is information that designers will never have to put on their sell sheet to a publisher. So things like, the MSRP and the quantity in a display unit and the size of the box and the display size and the SKU and the UPC code. And those letters mean nothing to Daryl and I, but they're really super important from the end of the business that Maggie and Jayme deal with, right? So that's super cool. And another one, Mike suggested looking at Fireside Games to have great sell sheets. So Fireside Games, they're the people that make Castle Panic and Star
Bears.
Trek Panic and stuff like that. Yeah, Bears. Okay, so let's bring the questions back to Jayme. Okay, so Jayme. Oh, hey,
Yes.
that's Eli. Jayme, let's talk about we're talking about sell sheets, and you covered that extremely well. So let's move on to how does a company like GTS or any of the other companies that stand between, the publisher and the end user store or whoever's doing the buying, what services do you provide that make it worthwhile to go to distribution um, instead of going to directly to a store one by one with boxes in hand, that kind of thing.
Sure. I mean, I feel like one of the biggest hurdles in doing direct fulfillment is having to have a warehouse organization or fulfillment company who can physically sync all of the data of incoming orders. And then you'll have to have a team of people who are constantly monitoring on-time ship. Is the right product going out? Is the warehouse's inventory syncing with our internal inventory? I did a lot of direct fulfillment at my last job, and it was extremely hard to stay on top of. So that's kind of the no-brainer duh answer there of like, yes, it's easier if you have a company taking care of all of that for you. But for GTS specifically, our marketing team is very robust. And so that is a big perk to doing business with us as a publisher. We have 11 people on our marketing team. And we provide both retail facing and consumer facing marketing services. And so that's one less thing that the publishers should have to worry about because they're so busy tracking all of that other information. Like, is my game actually getting made? They don't have to worry about doing all of the marketing themselves. We can help take some of that burden off of them.
Right. And of course that all
Amazing.
still costs money, right? But it's money that is probably well worth it if you aren't an expert in that kind of logistics stuff, right?
Of course. And so each relationship is determined when that partnership is formed. And so certain companies, we basically want to work with companies that are communicative, that, are open to new ideas, who have a good exchange with us. And so much of it is relationship management. But hopefully and ultimately there should be enough benefit where it's worth using a service like this. I can't really speak to the costs or anything like that, but
That's fine.
it's certainly a benefit to them to have to take some of that off of their plates.
Totally, exactly. A lot of publishers are pretty small, so they don't have the luxury of having a team like that. So then having access to those kind of services are a great way for them to multitask and
to also kind of have a built-in network of the retailers that you're selling your products to is a huge value. Instead of you having to go out and make all those relationships yourself, when you sign with distribution, you instantly have access to their entire retailer network.
That's an amazing point. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. We have a question from the audience. David Tomei threw a question on the chat board, and I want to point this one to Jayme. I'm actually going to reword it because the question is, what's the biggest turnoff or mistake when it comes to marketing a game? Maybe tough to talk on the negative, so maybe instead we'll flip it to the positive and say, what are some of the best choices or good examples of games in the last year that were marketed well? Can you think of some examples internally where you saw some good choices when it comes to marketing and that helped a game be noticed, or is there any kind of things like that you can point to as success stories of marketing in the last little while?
Sure. I'm trying to think of some great examples here. And of course, as soon as you put someone on the spot, their mind goes. But
Maggie will be putting
Sorry
you on
about
the
that.
spot soon.
And I reworded the question. Like you could have cheated and like saw Tomei's question, but I reversed it and made it all complicated. But
so I'm trying to think. I mean, I can speak in general terms. I'm having a hard time identifying specific games that I was like, ooh, that marketing is great. But I like engagement. I really think that publishers who take an extra step and engage their end users and their core audience, that is like some of the best marketing that you can do. If you are having contests or, taking feedback from people who are interested in the game, that's really important. And I think that it humanizes your brand. And it's something that not every publisher has the time and resources to do. So I feel that companies that really make an effort to interact with their consumers, that's A+ marketing from my perspective.
perfect. Great example.
Yeah, we'll go with that for now.
Go with
I like
that
it.
right now.
I like it.
Good stuff. And from the feed, Bobby Stickle is saying this is the most crowded our industry has ever been. Hundreds of new titles every month, sometimes every week. It's extremely difficult for a single game to stand out from the crowd. Hence, marketing can sometimes mean life or death for a new title. And he said right now that Portal probably has some of the best consumer engagement on the scene. What do you think, Maggie, of what Bobby's saying? Obviously, we all pretty much agree, but is there things that survive even though there's like that not that great marketing or not great engagement? Have you seen things that have this kind of bubbling under from the underground come up and
So
survive?
So what I think survives in the long run, and this is true of any marketing, and I would answer this in almost any field, knowing your audience. Portal, above all others, knows their audience. They have the niche gamers who really care about European strategy with some theme attached. Like, they know who they're marketing to, and they speak to them where they live. So Portal gets on Snapchat and has like Periscope live chats and stuff like that. But like when a company, and I'm gonna name companies right now. I'm sorry. Like when a company like a Mattel or something comes into a space where they're not traditionally known to be present. Like Mattel had a pretty good space at, it was Origins or Gen Con. Like they had a
Gen
pretty,
Con, they were
Gen Con this year,
right beside
well, that's what I'm saying, like,
USAopoly.
but it was like,
Yeah.
it was almost off-putting for some of us in the like 1% niche board gamers upon board gamers. Like we're like, what is Mattel doing here with their gorgeous game? What is this? So knowing their audience was also important for them to tell us what they were going to do and introduce us to their new plan if they wanted to get into that space before they just like show up. So I think it goes both ways though. You go into mass and you see some games trying to break into the Walmart Target audience, but they're not changing to meet that audience. They're staying pretty true to what they did originally. And I think it feels awkward. Like it doesn't feel correct. So I think anyone that can identify what they do best and who cares and then market to that person is doing a great job. And if they can branch out a little bit and gain new audiences, that's even better. But you really, really need to do some self-evaluation and know best who wants to listen to you. And I think Mike is talking about Jayme Stegmeyer in the chat right now. He does a great job of knowing exactly who cares about Jayme Stegmeyer and Stegmeyer games and marketing straight to that audience. Aim on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm gonna follow up with Maggie actually on that note. If you were, I mean, consulting for all the different publishers that are trying to scream for a voice, what are some of the things they could be doing that then ultimately would help you do your job? I mean, we talked about sell sheets, but even just we're talking about brand and we're talking about communication here. Are there any other tips or things that you would suggest publishers could do to help make your job a little easier? Another question from David Tomei, who's just providing me with all my questions. I love it. Keep them coming, David.
He's on it. I love it. So you cut out a little bit, but I believe you asked what publishers could be doing to make marketing and getting into the market easier. Is that correct? Okay. So my job specifically, and probably Jayme's too, is get your assets in order and hand them to anyone that wants them. You got cover photos and all that stuff. Just hand them like they're candy, like they're going out of style. Just give me all that images because you have them and I want them. So the second that I have a sell sheet and it has a cover image on it, I also want the cover image. But that is literally just industry stuff. For non-industry things, I would say slow your roll. Pick the cream of the crop. Pick a couple titles. You don't need to publish 20 titles a year. You need to publish a few. Just slow your roll. Like I know not every company can be days of wonder. Like you can't survive and make payroll and do everything on one title a year and some expansions, but you don't need to publish 36 games a year when only 4 of them are really, really viable and like 32 of them everyone kind of has to deal with and then fire sale at the end of the year. So you see this all over the industry is that everyone's going to say just like be more choosy. Like you can afford it. We are going to try and get more people into gaming, but until you find that like crop of new gamers out there, like slow down a little bit so we can all focus on the good stuff, because so many good games are getting swallowed up by nothingness right now that like I have games on my shelf that should have been hits that were never hits, that weren't even good, like weren't even viable on the shelf.
But they're great games, right?
They're great games. I have amazing games in my collection, let me tell you.
Yeah. And the problem is then probably like what Jayme was alluding to, that some games die a death, or sorry, Bobby was alluding to that some games die an early death because they're not marketed well enough. And that
So
can be
what
due
I'll
to
say,
budgetary things and whatnot, right?
well, and games right now, the lifespan of a game, you pre-order an amount, you probably sell through either that amount or that amount minus about 10%, and then you may never reorder it as a retailer.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do reorder, if you constantly keep something in order, that is the 1 in a million. It's the
Right.
ticket to ride. It's the evergreen whatever.
Yeah,
But it's funny at this point that
it's hopefully Sagrada and junk art.
I've got my fingers crossed for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And by the way, you just got a virtual standing ovation on our chat when you said slow your roll. Everybody's like, preach, testify. It was
It's true that, and like, and I know that so many cool ideas are coming out, but then you have to tell that idea, okay, go back and make me something amazing. Take that cool idea and make it amazing. But they don't. They just put out the cool idea.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem. Jayme, go ahead.
There's definitely a big fear, I think, among a lot of people who are creating games that like, well, if I don't make this, somebody else is going to. And so it's this race to see who can get there first. And you know, in the long run, that's not sustainable at all, and it ends up hurting your own products because, like Maggie said, the lifespan is drawn down, and instead of a new game that's coming out getting the full year of attention that it really deserves or whatever, like your next title is getting off the boat the next day, and then you have to start, you know, marketing that one now, and so everybody already has forgotten about it. And it's somebody who's coming in and trying to learn all these products for the first time. It's really overwhelming. So I can only imagine, you know, that is the case universally, and that's not just a problem for somebody who's newer to the industry.
And you're cannibalizing sales from yourself, right? And it's really kind of an interesting conundrum, because in publishing, usually the and I think people take this almost too much to heart. The old adage, the old saying is publish or die, right? So you need to keep punching out things and pushing out SKUs, or you're not doing your job. But I think what you're saying, and this is where it's relevant to Daryl and I, seeing as our other job other than designing is in development, that we end up with a bunch of games that are not only undermarketed, but are likely underdeveloped because they are trying to get to market too quick. What do you think of that, Daryl?
Well, I think I obviously agree. I'm a developer, but I think I understand the temptation. A lot of people, a lot of publishers, like we were saying before, they're pumping them out too fast. I think it is scary because there is such of an influx of games to just sit there, and work on a game when, like, to some degree, some publishers just feel like it's luck if their game takes off. So there seems like a mentality from some publishers, and I'm not gonna like name who, but like it feels like some publishers are just throwing things against the wall, hoping something sticks, and instead of spending the time into development, it's like, well, let's just get the next game. Like, let's just keep pumping through.
Yeah.
And we're hearing internally that is horrible for distributors, because how do you communicate all those titles? It's just too
Right.
much. And no matter what, then like it's a difficult job to really have the game shine, but it will shine, and it's easier for distributors to focus on well-developed games because they know this is a good game. They can vouch for it and communicate to their stores. This is a great game that a publisher put in the time to make sure this game is high quality, and it's going to be something that you can invest learning the game, because it's going to keep selling. It's not going to be like 1 month and then you never see that game again. So
Yeah.
It's scary times in some ways, and it's good times in other ways. So
yeah, I just wish that all of
I
us had
think
more
it's
say
good.
about that. Yeah. Jayme, coming back to you because Paul asked a question that I think pertains to something you said before.
Sure.
Paul Saxford of Roxley Games. I think he puts that as his handle just so I have to say Roxley Games every time I say his names.
Smart.
Yes, right. That's good marketing. Mentioned that Portal Games connects well to their specific target audience by a couple of specific social media formats. Do you have comments about what kind of gamer likes what platform of connection? What do you think is the most effective social media for a company like Portal? Somebody mentioned Periscope. What else is
Yeah,
good?
so I think that the smart answer is to not put all of your eggs in one basket, because consumers in general are not just one type of person, and presumably they all like to consume media on multi-platforms. I, for instance, don't use Twitter very much. We were talking about that a little bit before the show started, but I know some people that live, breathe Twitter. Like the second something happens, they're all over it, and that's a great tool.
Hmm.
Um, I really like Ignacio's like live stream videos that he does, where all of a sudden, you're seeing his face and he's showing you stuff that's happening behind the scenes. That's really interesting to me as a consumer. So I think the key is to diversify. It's to identify the different segments in your market. Do you have these really, really heavy BGG users that you're trying to cater to on one hand, but then you also have these kind of like casual gamers who want to see products on, Pinterest or something. Like they want beautiful photography of games. And so knowing what your options are and then prioritizing based on who's buying what percentage of your products is a very smart thing to do.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I want to continue this debate that's going on actually on the chat right now about evergreens. Point this question to you, Jayme. I'm curious. What are your thoughts? Are there? I mean, this is a question that comes up, but do you think there are evergreen games, or is the idea of the ticket to rides that there was like one obvious big hit? Like, do you think that there's a lot of that still, or do you think that there's just a plethora of titles and evergreens will never happen again? I will quote Amber Cook, who says evergreens are dead.
So it's tough. And I think that an easy way to sort of conceptualize that is to think about like different places that you've lived in your life. And for instance, if you lived in a town that had 2 restaurants, those were your restaurants. Awesome. If you live in a town that has 200 restaurants, even if you really, really like one of them, you're not going to go to it every single time because there's 200 other restaurants and there's new restaurants opening all the time. That's exactly what's happening with games. Even if a game is amazing and the designers did everything right, the publishers did everything right, distribution marketed it beautifully, like there's just so much product out there, and people who are playing the games only have a set amount of time and attention to afford each title. So even if it's their favorite title, they're going to experience this massive FOMO, like, well, what else is out there? And I have to keep up and I can't take a break. I can't just focus on one thing. I have to play everything. And so I kind of agree that while the games themselves could have the potential to be an evergreen, I think that it's going to sort of sneak up on us once the bubble bursts. So once all this crazy cult of the new oversaturation of the market settles down a little bit and the dust settles, I think that the titles that were strong might reemerge, and then you'll be able to pinpoint them as evergreens. But I don't think that it's going to happen, as immediately as it has in the past. It's going to be harder to identify right off the bat because there's too much going on.
That's a good point. There's a lot of good conversation up in our stream right now. If you're not a part of it, get on there because it's great. We have some more questions coming out here. Let's see where they are. And this one's going to Maggie. I gotta scroll up. Okay, so David Tomei asks, are there any hurdles with getting games to the end customers, like retailers, based on limitations caused by the retailers or publishers? David said he's not sure this makes sense, so I'm not exactly sure what he's asking. But what I'm getting from it is that do publishers make it actually harder on themselves to get games through distribution to the end user by things that they're doing? Have you seen any publisher do that to themselves? You don't need to name names, but shoot themselves in the foot basically and make your job harder. Is there something they could do to make it easier?
And so was that I don't think it's a distributor issue. I think it is the whole supply chain works in a specific way.
Mhm.
And so some games don't function well in that chain.
Okay.
I will name a couple examples. So Tim Fowers, who did Paperback and Burglar Bros and upcoming hardback, does not use any kind of distribution. He uses a direct model. And you get companies like, gosh, I cannot remember the name of this company. Oh no, they did the Conan board game, and they originally did it through Asmodee, but now they have like a big Batman game coming out. Monolith. I knew it was a company, and I don't want to like them, so I knew it was called that, but I didn't want to say it. So I feel like some games are going to come out. My example would be The Seventh Continent. A game will come out, and it'll come out in a way where they're publishing it and they're getting it to end users, but wouldn't survive in the traditional supply chain. And so I think publishers themselves against this to a certain extent. Like, a lot of us, including myself when I was a retail buyer, kind of took a bath on Conan. Like, that sucked. The retail version of it was not what we wanted, and having to buy those boxes sucked. And like, it was not a game or price point or a markup designed to really work for retailers. So a distributor saying, hey, Monolith, your games are adorable and wonderful, you should probably just go direct, makes sense to me. But I think, again, it's a knowing your audience problem. So Seventh Continent, if I was the creator of Seventh Continent, I would either only ever go direct, or I would create a retail version of my game that could be worked and marketed and sold with traditional markups. Because the points that you make, like, I sell a game for $10 to the retailer. Every supply chain is getting some amount of that. The continent is so full of cards and so full of expansions and so many add-ons that it's just not viable to put that all the way through the distribution chain as it is. But you could make a retail product that was the same experience, that worked in a different way, that was a different price point. So I do think that there are some limitations to how distribution works in gaming, and it works similarly to books or comics or any kind of niche something. And I know books shouldn't be niche, but they are. I just think that, like, people say it's really hard to get into distribution. It's just that distribution has certain rules, and they have price points, and they have, like, guidelines that they'd like to follow, because not every game can be Gloomhaven. Not every game can come out with that kind of MSRP and that kind of overhead and that kind of space that it takes up and be commercially viable. It's the 1 in 100.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, kind of following up the similar question, I'm curious about, and I'm going to point this back to Maggie, but is it ever a good thing, or how can it be a good thing when a game is sold out? Do you think that that's ever like a positive?
That's
Because
a
I'm sure you
big
have to deal with
question.
that.
Oh man. Okay, so a game being sold out is a great thing in a couple of ways, and it's a horrible thing in a couple of ways. And I'll be really sad about this answer. So I am a publisher, a small publisher. Let's say I am a first-time designer and I put out my first game and my game sells out. That's freaking fantastic. People are chomping at the bit, waiting for my next release of that product. I'd say Role Player is a really good example of that.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm an established publisher like old-time Z-Man Shadowhunters, and I run out of my first printing of a game, that works against my brand. And so I think it depends on your place in the market. It depends on your brand, and it depends on how well people know you. So it should be a good thing that you sell out of a print run. It's a horrible thing if you can't pay for your next one until you do another Kickstarter. And I know that that is on some people's financial schemes where they don't pay for the second printing with the first printing's Kickstarter, but it just, sellouts are tricky in this business because we are making a physical product. It's not a digital code that you can just give out more of, and you have to deal with China, and you have to deal with container ships, and you have to deal with customs. And so your planned sellouts also really matter what time of year they happen in. Personally, that's my opinion. Like, don't sell out in October.
Oh, that'd be horrible.
But everyone does. I'm telling you right now, like, people sell out in October, or they release at Essen and don't come out in the States till February. And those are both not great things for us, because the States have a really, we have a predictable buying pattern, and it gets real hot in the winter months, but most stores have purchased all that they're going to purchase by September or October maybe. Mm-hmm. And then the spring, like before back to school, is really awful, and you see a lot of games coming out and just kind of failing during that time, and then it picks back up. And the cyclical nature is it's a little more muddied now with Kickstarter, but it's still present.
Right. And I mean, the whole issue of cash flow and, being able to hit print while something's going out of stock instead of waiting, it's such an interesting thing that publishers have to deal with. Jayme, you wanted to talk about something that's really important, and it actually goes to just what I said about hitting print on your game. What is the thing you want to talk about, Jayme? Because I thought, that's brilliant. Let's do it. It's perfect right now.
So we have such a great hive mind right now that I was kind of curious as to what people thought about how publishers should gauge print size, because that's something that I think there is this huge question in the industry of, like, how can you do this accurately? And there hasn't been a great solution yet. It's always just sort of, well, it's your most educated guess. But the data required to accurately forecast that thing isn't quite available universally yet. And so, I mean, even from your perspective, I'm curious, how do you decide, as somebody who's, designing a game or working with publishers, figuring out how many to print? How do you make that decision?
That is a really good question. So Paul up in the feed works with Roxley, so maybe he'll be able to answer from their perspective. I know from our perspective, as designers, we don't get a ton of say in that regard. The only thing I do know particularly is expansions. Expansions, we follow a 1/3 rule that to make a print run of a viable size, which is typically at 1,000, you're going to get a decent price break, that you have to sell at least 3 times as many base units of the game in order to then make make it worthwhile to publish an expansion at 1,000. So typically, companies that need and rely on those price breaks at different levels have to wait longer and longer to do an expansion. Um, and I mean, you see that on Kickstarter all the time. Like, hey, get our expansion, and by the way, please buy this extra unit that never sold in the first print run, right? So we get all that kind of stuff as well. Daryl, what's your input on that in terms of volume?
Yeah, well, I think actually that is a very good question that designers need to ask publishers when they're signing their games, and real practicals like what how do you envision like the first print run, like what kind of print run are you going to go for, or asking what if it's a hit, like how are you going to respond, even just a real practical talk. A lot of reviewers are designers, like betting on yourself and asking for a royalty structure that climbs if the game is a success. And something like that a publisher might be more open to because there's less sunk cost, but also that incentivizes publishers to maybe make bigger print runs. Like if you say on the second print run or the third print run, I'm hoping for a better royalty. Well, then maybe they'll make a bigger first print run because it's kind of incentivizing them to take a risk and make a good volume print instead of, sadly, I think because the market's so saturated, a lot of publishers are scared and want to sell out of that first print run to make sure they know it's a good game, and then they don't respond or even have a plan for that game selling out. So it's a little bit of catch up of trying to then know how to respond. And cash flow are real practical things too for especially small publishers. So that's one of the reasons that designers are talking to bigger publishers and smaller publishers is there's pros and cons, and those print runs are going to be bigger or smaller accordingly. So I think that's a real factor. I want to follow up with Jayme on this as well. How do you manage and communicate with stores in between the print runs, and like all that kind of like trying to keep some of that excitement, and how do you manage that excitement, respond to that? Because sometimes games can get forgotten in the in-between time, and sometimes games thankfully are still remembered, but because of this cult of the new, how do you manage that as a marketer?
You sit there and get yelled at and smile and say everything's going to be fine. I mean, before I get to that, just one more quick point on what you were talking about before. I think that it's really important to sort of come full circle on the discussion of print run size and how, as the influx of product is growing, it becomes exponentially more difficult to gauge and guess what sorts of print runs you're going to be putting out, because there's so many titles that you might not have the same level of your historical sales data of past titles. And also, the more products you have, the less cash flow you might have to spread around between the two. So I think that in general used to be a lot easier for publishers to do, and it's getting harder and harder the more is out there. But then over to your next question. As a marketer, when we are sold out of a product or something gets allocated, it puts us in a difficult position because you don't want the title to be forgotten. So obviously you need to keep it sort of in the spotlight, but people react very negatively to being shown products that they can't get. And so you have to be conscious of that, and you have to try to keep your campaigning a little bit lighter, or at least be able to give firm, correct information on when you'll have the title available next.
Right.
And that's one of the most difficult parts of the business, because there are so many factors that can change that information on a daily basis, from manufacturing setbacks to, oh, we missed our shipping window, so the next ship doesn't leave for another 2 weeks, to this game just got held up in customs and now we're going to miss Thanksgiving. Like, there's so many things that can go wrong, and I think transparency is always the key to keeping people happy. So getting as much up-to-date, accurate information from the publishers as possible and passing that along to retailers and consumers is the best you can do in those situations. When you're out of stock on something, just have the best line of communication as possible, and be open to the people that you're working with about that information.
Yeah. You're so my kind of person. That is my number one thing when I'm doing anything, teaching, signing a contract, whatever. It's open lines of communication solve all problems pretty much. So transparency is a big key with me.
And you can't really get mad at
no,
somebody for trying their best as long as they're giving you all the information they can. It's like, okay, I understand that now.
mhm,
I know that you're not just holding it back from me for no reason. So
right. And I mean, on Kickstarter campaigns, you see that all the time. Well, I'm not going to support this person anymore because they're not communicating back to me, right? So you see that on the very intimate end of like of a campaign. I'm gonna get to Maggie in a second. I just wanted to show you guys a few things. So Mike from PhD has said, yeah, another good example of sell sheets are from Looney Labs. No, oh, we said Looney Labs already, but this is from Fireside Games. So this is an example of Kaiju Crush. So it has their street date, it has their MSRP, their stock number, etc., dimensions. And if you close this and go here, you can see on their website, they have media kits for every game. This is exactly what Maggie was talking about when she said, give me everything you've got. And when you download one of these things from their site and you open up the zip file, you get PDFs of their quick guide sheet. You get all the covers, the side cover, the spine. You get all these other coming soon game thingies. I don't know what they are. A shelf talker. Oh, a shelf talker. You get the thing that you can put on the shelf to sell the game to customers at your store. So it's not only things for the distributor, it's things for the sales at point of sales in the friendly local game store, all that kind of stuff. So all the things that they give right inside their media kits or their press kits, as they call them, that's brilliant. And it's really something that most publishers should look into doing. All right, so back onto our track.
Wait. Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
And though Fireside does work with PSI, this is a totally aside. Fireside also provides one sheets of how to sell or teach their game,
I think
like
that's
in
a
a
quick
one
sell.
sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what they called it anymore. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
But I used to use this all the time as a retailer, so I will double highlight that. Like those are amazing for
Yeah.
retail.
So all publishers do that.
Yeah. Do that
Like
thing.
if I can sell your game in one sheet, like if I can teach it and sell it with just one sheet of information, that's amazing.
Yeah. Maggie, I'm gonna ask you our last question because we're going deep. We're going long into overtime here because the discussion has just been so rich. But we do have to wrap it up because sleep. We're on the East Coast here. So the last question to you is: we talked a little bit about data sharing on the chat and in our side chat. If you had the dream to be able to do your job best, what sort of data would you need shared between who? What do you think would make your job easier and get games into the hands of people who wanted them?
Oh man, that's a hard question. So, the number one thing that scares most of us in the industry, I will let you in on the secret. And it works similarly to book publishing or comic publishing, is that when you ask for a reprint, I am publisher A and I have a game and it does pretty well, and I run out of that game as a publisher, but I put it into distribution, right? Like I personally just gave it to distribution. All 5,000 copies is what I'm going to give you. Then once I'm out of it, when do I hit the button on more copies? Like when do I ask the producer to make more? If I do it as I sell out, the various distribution channels that I have sold to might just be sitting on those copies forever.
Hmm.
Like they might all have 1,000 copies a piece and I would not know. And so I would produce 5,000 more and I'd be like, hey, distribution, I sold out of my game. Would you like some more? And they'd be like, nah, I'm good. I got 1,000 copies from you last time. So it's this back and forth of print run size and distribution that really makes a difference between these publishers that are generally like two-guy operations out in the middle of nowhere, right? Like publishers are not these big conglomerates with a very few exceptions. Like you have one or two big companies that are run like big companies, and then you have a crap ton of these one or two guy operations that are publishing games, usually with a Kickstarter model. And so knowing when to actually push the button to do a reprint is really hard when you don't know how many of your games are just sitting on shelves somewhere, either in distribution or in retail, something that could be returned at any time. So if there was a good central database for quantities and where they are, that would be amazing. If there was software that most people use, like in restaurants, like in a restaurant, they're like in a given region, there's like 3 maybe stores that people use, and they're pretty well formulaic. So when you get to games and every single store you go to is using a different software and they're not talking to each other, you have no idea who the guy down the street, how many copies of any game they have.
Mhm.
So I think that would make the biggest difference, is if there was any sort of real-time reporting of how many copies of a given game were out in the world, especially because we're talking internationally now, but especially in a given market like the United States with giant, so many stores, like how many copies of something existed. That would save a lot of people a lot of money.
Mhm.
I
All
love
right.
it. I love when a plan comes together, because this is a perfect transition to my last question to Jayme.
Oh no.
I'm curious, what are some of the most exciting marketing tools that you're using right now?
Ooh, okay. So I will highlight my absolutely favorite tool that we're using right now. It's called Brand Connect, and it is this amazing retailer focused tool that we've implemented to help local stores push out information about the products that they're carrying.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you've ever worked in retail or if you've worked closely with retailers, but it's quite difficult to keep track of all of the product lines, much like it is for all of us. And to also run their own social marketing is very difficult. So we have started using this new tool where we can make campaigns using information and pictures and copy that we get from all of the different publishers whose products we sell. And then we can push them out through this platform that then notifies each retailer, hey, there's a new campaign for you. It's this game, and it shows them a little embedded picture of the marketing campaign. And they can click a single button, and it automatically gets reposted to their store Facebook page, branded completely like they posted it, not they just shared GTS Distribution's photo. And so it's connecting them to their consumers on a level that they haven't had the time and resources to do on their own necessarily in the past.
Mhm.
And it's fantastic. It pulls all of the reach statistics from each individual store and pulls them back to me so that I can share them with publishers and say, this is how many consumers, are really engaged and excited about this product. And it's still in the early phases of implementation, but we have a lot of really big plans for it coming up in 2018. And anything that helps retailers is huge in my book. That's one of the big initiatives that I'm focusing on for the next year. So that's definitely my number one pick.
Cool. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So before we end the show, I want to first of all apologize to Erwin. Apparently, I put on the Twitter feed that we're starting at 11. That used to be the time maybe 2 seasons ago, and it's still stuck in my head apparently. Old habits die hard when you're an old fart like me. But before we end, I don't know what the next show is going to be because we have a couple days at the end that that we leave blank because of potential cancellations, and we've had a few this year already. So we're going to hopefully get some of those people back. So it may be Matt Fantastic, Naomi Clark about sex positive games. It might be who else did we mess up? We messed up
I don't know,
another
but
one.
we'll make sure not to say sex
Yes.
in the title,
Yeah, we'll make sure that we
so
don't get
YouTube
blocked
doesn't
off of
shut us
YouTube
down.
again. Which that account is still shut down, just so you know, and it could be shut down till February. So that's why you get to see my son running across a field, because I'm doing this off my personal account. So okay, before we did that, I wanted to list off a couple things that Mike from PhD ranted about on the feed, which are mistakes that publishers make that shoot themselves in the foot for distribution. Unnatural box sizes, poor quality boxes, high case counts in those boxes. So like selling somebody, oh yeah, here's 68 copies of a game in a box. That's not a good look. Being inflexible with your freight allowance, having order dates that are due like really close to your solicitation point. So solicitation is when you say, hey, there's this thing coming out, and you have to get your order dates due by tomorrow. That's also not a good look. And then having an allocation system that is not good. Going into allocation is a bad thing. So typically. So really, there's a lot of things that publishers can do to make everybody's job easier, everybody's life better. I know there's obviously, not everything works like a well-oiled machine, and there's limitations in logistics at certain points. But those right there and what Jayme and Maggie brought to the table today are some key points to think about if you're a small publisher, if you're a medium publisher, and even maybe especially if you're a big publisher, as to how you can get your games into the hands of the people who want to play them more reliably. And in the end, it probably will cut your bottom line and make your margins better. So there you go. Over to Daryl, who has
He's
his mic
muted.
off. And he's still muted. Oh.
Wow. Sadness.
Yay!
Yay. This is the problem when I have multi windows in front, so I'm not actually even looking at my own video screen, and then I don't see that I'm muted. But I was saying, and I will repeat happily, a big thank you to Jayme and Maggie for being on the show. I really appreciate your wisdom, and I know that it is being echoed very much on the chat. Lots of people are asking to see you both again. They're learning lots. I'm learning lots.
Mm-hmm.
So we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and just really kind of educate and help, our viewers and us learn more about our industry and know how to do it a little bit better. Open the communication lines. I love it. I also just have to give a little shout out. I'm super proud of this just coming in the mail. I haven't even opened it. I just got this in the mail, which is the Mondo exclusive version of the thing.
What?
It's so sexy. Anyway, so I just had to show that off because I'm bragging. The shipping to Canada, which is a big problem in this world, was exorbitant. So if someone has a solution for that, please fix that problem. But meanwhile, I just want to say thank you to our viewers, to our guests, to Sen. Erica wasn't here. She was doing something very important, celebrating an engagement. But she sends her love as well. We just want to say, keep making great games, and we look forward to playing your game soon. All right. Have a good night.
See y'all.
Bye.